If you take over tomorrow, you'll inherit a lie. The message had no signature, no traceable sender, just those 9 words glowing cold against the screen of Ethan Cole's phone as he stood alone in his high-rise office, 30 floors above a city that never seemed to notice who was really in control. Outside, traffic flowed like veins of light, steady and indifferent, but inside, something shifted. Ethan read the message again, slower this time, letting each word settle. A lie. Not a mistake, not a risk, a lie. His reflection stared back at him in the glass wall, tailored suit, steady posture, the image of a man ready to lead a billion-dollar company. But tonight, that image felt like a costume he wasn't ready to wear. Tomorrow morning, he would step in as acting CEO of Cole Dynamics, the company his father built from nothing, the company that carried their name across industries, across states, across lives. And yet, in this moment, all he could think about was that message and the quiet certainty that whoever sent it knew something real. His pocket, Noah Reed, temporary operations assistant. The plastic felt cheap between his fingers, unfamiliar. He slipped it on anyway. As he crossed the street, the towering glass building didn't feel like his anymore. It felt like something he was about to infiltrate. Inside, the lobby buzzed with routine, coffee cups, hurried footsteps, elevator doors opening and closing in quiet rhythm. No one looked at him twice. No one paused. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole became invisible. He stepped into the elevator, standing shoulder to shoulder with employees who spoke in low voices about deadlines, about managers, about things that never reached the boardroom. "Did you hear about the audit?" One voice whispered. "They buried it." Another replied quickly, eyes flicking toward the security camera before looking away. Ethan didn't move, didn't react, but every word landed. The doors opened on the 14th floor. Operations. This was where the company actually breathed, where numbers turned into work, where policies turned into pressure. The lighting was harsher here, the air tighter. Rows of desks stretched across the floor, screens glowing, keyboards tapping in a steady, relentless rhythm. And then it happened. A sharp voice cut through the noise and returned to her desk. Efficient, quiet, invisible, just like everyone else was expected to be. Ethan watched her for a second longer than he meant to. There was something different about her. Not weakness, not submission, but restraint. Like she knew something no one else did. Like she had already learned the cost of speaking up. He shifted his weight, adjusting the unfamiliar badge on his chest. Noah Reed. Temporary. Replaceable. Safe. For now. But as he walked deeper into the floor, past conversations that dropped to whispers when managers passed, past screens that flickered with numbers no one questioned out loud, one thing became clear. That message hadn't been a warning. It had been an invitation. And Ethan had just stepped inside the lie. By 10:15 that morning, Ethan had already learned more about his company than any quarterly report had ever told him, and none of it felt accidental, because the patterns were too consistent, too practiced, like a script everyone knew but no one dared to question. He sat at a narrow desk near the back corner of the operations floor, the kind of spot no one noticed unless they needed something fixed, and quietly observed the rhythm around him, the way tasks were assigned, the way voices shifted depending on who was listening, the way certain names were never mentioned out loud. His computer screen displayed a simple onboarding checklist for temporary staff, but his attention was elsewhere, tracking details, collecting fragments, building something invisible but precise. A man in a gray button-down shirt walked past his desk and dropped a stack of printed reports without making eye contact. You are new. Alarms individually, but formed a pattern when viewed together. Percentages that shifted just enough to hide a deficit. Expense lines that reappeared under different labels. Adjustments that always seemed to benefit the same internal accounts. Keyboards had turned into a dull background hum, and the fluorescent lights above seemed harsher now, exposing every tired expression, every forced smile, every quiet moment when someone paused just a second too long before continuing their work, stood, moving casually closer, blending in just enough to observe without being obvious. Lily stood in the middle of it, a folder in her hands, her posture steady but her shoulders tight. To look ordinary, but access restrictions told the truth louder than any label. He glanced across the room again, his gaze settling briefly on Lily. She was working again, typing steadily, as if nothing had happened, as if the confrontation had never taken place. But now he knew better. She was not just another employee caught in the system. She was someone who had already seen the truth and refused to ignore it, even when the system pushed back. Ethan reached for his phone under the desk, careful, subtle, and opened a secure note. Clean slate protocol. He typed it slowly, deliberately, as if writing it made it more real. Because it was real. And whatever it was not just a file. It was a decision someone had made. A system someone had built. And now, it was something he was going to expose. The rest of the afternoon moved differently for Ethan, not slower, not faster, but sharper, like every sound and movement carried meaning now that he knew where to look. The words clean slate protocol stayed in his mind, not as a question anymore, but as a pressure building just beneath the surface. Systems like that did not exist without intention, and intention meant someone had designed it, approved it, protected it. He sat at his desk, pretending to organize reports, but his attention shifted between screens, between people, between patterns that were beginning to connect in ways that felt too precise to ignore. Every few minutes, a manager would walk past, scanning desks not for productivity, but for compliance, for silence, for anything that might break the rhythm they had carefully built. Ethan noticed how conversations stopped mid-sentence when certain people approached, how eyes dropped instinctively, how even the smallest acts of hesitation carried risk. It was not fear in the obvious sense. It was something more controlled, more conditioned, like everyone had learned the rules without ever being told directly. Around 3 in the afternoon, a notification popped up on Ethan's screen, a system-wide alert about an internal performance review scheduled for the end of the week. Mandatory attendance. Department evaluations. Language that sounded routine, but something about the timing felt deliberate. He clicked into the details, scanning quickly. The review would include individual assessments, productivity scores, and compliance metrics. No mention of employee feedback. No mention of internal concerns. Just performance. Measured. Controlled. He leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. This was not just about tracking work. This was about filtering people. His gaze shifted across the floor again, landing on Lily. She had not looked up from her screen in over 20 minutes, her focus steady, her posture composed. But now that he understood more, he could see it. The way she worked with precision that went beyond expectation, like she was constantly double-checking not just her own work, but the system itself. Like she knew that one mistake, one overlooked detail, could be used against her. Ethan stood, picking up a small stack of reports as an excuse, and walked toward her desk. "Do you have a minute?" he asked quietly. Lily looked up, surprised, then nodded. "What is it?" she replied, her tone neutral, careful. Ethan placed the reports on her desk, pointing to a section. "These numbers from last quarter," he said, keeping his voice low. "They do not match the adjusted figures from this week." Lily's eyes flickered to the screen, then back to him, just for a second. Not panic. Recognition. "They are not supposed to," she said softly. Ethan held her gaze. "Why?" he asked. She hesitated, not because she did not know, but because she was deciding whether to say it. The room around them felt louder suddenly, even though nothing had changed. "Because the adjustments are not corrections," she said finally. "They are replacements." Ethan felt that word settle. Replacements. Not fixing errors. Rewriting them. "And no one questions it," he said. Lily gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "People used to," she replied. "They just do not anymore." He studied her for a moment, then lowered his voice even further. "What happens during the performance review?" he asked. Lily's expression shifted slightly, something tighter, more guarded. "People who ask too many questions," she said, "do not pass." There it was. Not written, not announced, but understood. Ethan straightened slightly, his mind moving quickly now, connecting everything he had seen, everything he had uncovered, everything that still remained hidden. "And the clean slate protocol," he said quietly, watching her reaction closely. For the first time, Lily's composure cracked, just slightly. Her fingers stilled on the keyboard, her eyes dropping for a fraction of a second before returning to him. "You should not know that name," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan did not look away. "But I do," he replied. Silence stretched between them, heavier than anything that had happened so far. Lily glanced around quickly, making sure no one was paying attention, then leaned in just slightly, her voice controlled but urgent. "It is not a protocol," she said. "It is a filter." Ethan felt something click into place. "A filter for what?" he asked. Lily met his gaze, and this time, there was no hesitation. "For people who still think the company is supposed to be honest," she said. The words landed quietly, but they carried weight that could not be ignored. Ethan exhaled slowly, his decision forming more clearly now. This was not just about exposing a flaw. This was about dismantling something that had been built to protect itself. He nodded once, subtle, controlled, then gathered the reports from her desk. "Thank you," he said simply. Lily watched him for a second, something unreadable in her expression. "Be careful," she replied. "They are watching more than you think." Ethan turned, walking back to his desk, but her words stayed with him. They are watching. Of course they were. Systems like this did not operate blindly. They observed. They tracked. They anticipated. But for the first time since he had walked into the building that morning, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not uncertainty, not doubt, but clarity. Whatever Clean Slate Protocol was, whatever it had already done, it was not going to stay hidden much longer. By the time the clock edged past 4 in the afternoon, the tension on the floor had shifted into something quieter but more dangerous, like a system tightening its grip without making a sound, and Ethan could feel it in the way access slowed just slightly on certain files, in the way his screen flickered once before loading a report that had opened instantly earlier that day, in the way his supervisor paused a second longer than necessary when walking past his desk. They were not reacting openly, but they were adjusting, and that meant one thing. Someone, somewhere, had noticed a disturbance. Ethan kept his posture relaxed, his expression neutral, but his focus sharpened even further as he navigated through the system again, this time more carefully, more deliberately, avoiding the obvious paths and instead tracing the hidden connections he had begun to map out in his mind. The Clean Slate Protocol was not just a label anymore. It was a mechanism, and like any mechanism, it had inputs, outputs, and a trigger. He just needed to find where those intersected. Across the room, the normal rhythm continued, but it felt more forced now, like a performance everyone was trying a little harder to maintain. Conversations were shorter. Movements were quicker. Even the break room, usually filled with low chatter during the late afternoon slump, sat unusually quiet when Ethan passed by it again, the hum of the vending machine louder than any human voice. When he returned to his desk, a new notification waited for him. Mandatory system update. Effective immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly. That was fast. Too fast. He clicked into it, scanning the details. Updated access permissions. Revised data visibility. Certain internal folders would be restricted pending review. No explanation. Just enforcement. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. This was not routine. This was containment. And whatever they were trying to contain, it was close enough now to matter. He glanced across the floor, his eyes finding Lily again. She was still working, but something had changed. Her movements were more precise, her attention sharper, like she felt it too. The shift in the air, the invisible line that had just been crossed. Ethan stood, walking toward her desk again, this time with no reports in hand, no obvious reason. She looked up before he even spoke, as if she had been expecting him. "They are locking it down," he said quietly. Lily nodded once. "They always do," she replied. "Whenever someone gets too close." Ethan lowered his voice. "How close is too close?" he asked. Lily held his gaze for a moment, then glanced briefly toward the glass offices at the far end of the floor where senior management sat behind closed doors. "Close enough that they stop pretending it is not happening," she said. Ethan followed her gaze, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned slightly closer. "What happens after that?" he asked. Lily's jaw tightened just a fraction. "That depends," she said, "on whether the person backs off." Ethan straightened, his decision already made. "And if they do not," he pressed. Lily hesitated, just for a second, then looked back at him, something steady and unflinching in her eyes now. "Then they disappear from the system," she said. The words were simple, but they carried weight that did not need explanation. Not fired, not transferred, removed. Clean slate. Ethan felt the full meaning settle in, connecting everything he had seen, everything he had uncovered, everything that had been quietly erased before it could surface. He nodded once, slowly. "That is not going to happen this time," he said, his voice calm but certain. Lily studied him, something shifting behind her eyes, something that looked almost like hope but guarded, careful not to reveal too much. "You sound very sure for a temporary employee," she said. Ethan allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile, not enough to reveal anything, but enough to show he was not uncertain. "Maybe I am just paying attention," he replied. Before she could respond, a voice cut across the floor. "Lily, my office." Now, the manager from earlier stood near the glass corridor, his expression sharp, controlled, already expecting compliance. The room fell quiet again, the kind of silence that carried attention without movement. Lily's shoulders straightened, her composure returning instantly. She stood, smoothing the front of her blouse, then looked at Ethan for just a fraction of a second. Not fear, not hesitation, just acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked toward the office. Ethan watched her go, every instinct in him tightening, not with panic, but with calculation. This was it. Not the end, but the shift. The system was no longer passive. It was reacting. He returned to his desk, but his hands did not move toward the reports this time. Instead, he reached for his phone again, opening the secure note where one phrase still sat alone. "Clean slate protocol." He added another line beneath it. "Trigger initiated." Because that was what this was. Not a coincidence. Not routine. A response. And if the system had decided to move, then so would he. Ethan glanced once more toward the glass offices, where Lily had just disappeared behind a closed door, then back at the screen in front of him. The lie was no longer hidden. It was active, and now it was running out of time. The moment Lily disappeared behind the glass office door, the entire floor seemed to hold its breath, not visibly, not dramatically, but in the subtle way conversations stopped restarting and keyboards slowed just enough to notice if you were paying attention. And Ethan was paying attention to everything now, because this was no longer about gathering clues. This was about timing, about understanding exactly when the system revealed its true form. He remained seated, his posture relaxed, his eyes focused on the screen in front of him, but his attention stretched across the room, tracking movement, watching who looked toward that office and who deliberately did not. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No one spoke about it. No one asked. That silence was not accidental. It was learned. Ethan leaned slightly forward, opening another layer of internal access, this time moving faster, less cautious, because he knew the window was closing. The clean slate protocol had been triggered, and systems like that did not wait. They acted. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, bypassing restricted paths, using fragments of access still available before the lockdown fully settled in. Then he found it. Not the protocol itself, but its operational log. Hidden under a generic system maintenance label, time-stamped entries with no names, only employee identification numbers and status updates. Reviewed. Flagged. Processed. Removed. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly as he scrolled. Each entry followed the same pattern. A complaint filed. A review initiated. A performance evaluation scheduled. Then a final status. Removed from active system. No explanation. No record of termination. Just absence. He stopped scrolling when he saw the most recent entry. Time-stamped less than 3 minutes ago. His eyes locked onto the employee identification number. He did not need the system to tell him who it belonged to. Lily Harper. Status pending. Ethan exhaled slowly, but there was no hesitation in him now, no uncertainty, only a clear, controlled urgency that sharpened every thought. This was happening in real time. And if he waited, if he stayed in the role he had chosen this morning, she would become another line in that log, another erased name, another truth buried under the illusion of order. He stood, not abruptly, not in a way that would draw attention, but with purpose. His phone was already in his hand as he moved toward the corridor leading to the glass offices. No one stopped him. No one questioned him, because no one expected a temporary employee to walk in that direction with intent. The hallway felt colder, quieter, the sounds of the main floor fading behind him as he approached the closed door. Through the glass, he could see silhouettes, movement, controlled gestures that suggested a conversation already reaching its conclusion. He paused for half a second, just enough to steady his breathing, just enough to make the next step deliberate. Then he opened the door. The room fell silent immediately. 3 people sat around the table. The manager from earlier, another senior supervisor, and Lily, seated across from them, her posture straight, her expression composed but guarded. All eyes turned to Ethan. Confusion first, then irritation. "This is a restricted meeting," the manager said sharply. "You cannot be in here." Ethan closed the door behind him, the soft click echoing louder than it should have. He did not respond right away. Instead, he took a step forward, his gaze moving from one face to another, measuring, confirming, understanding. "I think I should be," he said finally, his voice calm, controlled, carrying a weight that did not match the role they believed he held. The supervisor frowned, leaning forward slightly. "Who exactly do you think you are?" he asked. Ethan reached into his pocket, not for his phone this time, but for the small plastic badge clipped there. Noah Reed, temporary operations assistant. He looked at it for a brief moment, then unclipped it and set it on the table. The room remained silent, but something shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible. "That name was useful," he said quietly, "but it is not the one that matters." Lily's eyes widened just slightly, the first real break in her composure since he had met her. The manager scoffed lightly, dismissive, but there was tension behind it now. "If this is some kind of joke," he started, but Ethan cut him off, not with volume, but with certainty. "It is not," he said. Then he reached for his phone, tapping once, pulling up a file, and placing it on the table where everyone could see. The operational log. The entries. The pattern. The truth. "Clean slate protocol," he said, the words landing clearly in the room. No one spoke. No one moved. And in that silence, Ethan finally lifted his gaze fully, no longer as Noah Reed, no longer as someone blending into the system, but as the person who owned it, the person who could no longer allow it to continue. "My name is Ethan Cole," he said, his voice steady, unshaken. "And this ends now." For a moment, no one in the room moved, as if the words had not fully registered yet, as if reality itself needed a second to catch up with what had just been said, and Ethan could see it in their faces, the disbelief first, then the calculation, then the quiet panic that tried to stay hidden behind practiced professionalism. The manager was the first to recover, leaning back slightly in his chair, forcing a small, controlled smile that did not reach his eyes. "If this is some kind of misunderstanding," he began, his tone carefully measured, "we can discuss it properly through the board." Ethan did not look away. "You already had that chance," he replied calmly. The supervisor beside him shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the phone on the table, at the log still displayed, the entries undeniable in their simplicity. "Those records are internal processes," the supervisor said quickly, his voice tightening. "They are not meant to be interpreted out of context." Ethan nodded once, as if acknowledging the statement, but there was no agreement in his expression. "Then explain the context," he said. Silence followed again, but this time it was different, heavier, because the question did not allow an easy answer. Lily remained seated, her eyes moving between them, not speaking, not interrupting, but everything about her presence carried weight now, because she was no longer just an employee in the room. She was proof. The manager leaned forward slightly, his composure starting to crack at the edges. "You do not understand how complex this organization is," he said. "Decisions have to be made to maintain stability. Not every concern can be addressed the way employees think it should be." Ethan's gaze sharpened. "So you remove them instead," he said. The words landed with quiet precision. The supervisor opened his mouth, then closed it again, searching for something to say that would not confirm what was already obvious. There was none. Ethan reached for his phone again, scrolling once before turning the screen toward them, revealing more than just the log now, cross-referenced reports, timestamps, internal communications that had been quietly stored, patterns that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. "This is not stability," he said. "This is control." The manager's expression hardened, the last layer of denial giving way to something more defensive. "We protected this company," he said, "from internal disruption, from people who do not understand the bigger picture." Ethan took a step closer to the table, his voice still calm, but now carrying a weight that filled the room completely. "The bigger picture does not erase the truth," he said. "It exposes it." Another silence followed, but this time, it was not just inside the room. Through the glass walls, the employees outside had begun to notice. Movement had slowed. Eyes had lifted. Conversations had stopped again, but now there was curiosity mixed with it, tension that spread outward like a ripple. Ethan turned slightly, glancing through the glass, then back at the two men in front of him. "This does not stay in this room," he said. "Not anymore." The supervisor shifted in his seat, his voice dropping. "You cannot make this public without consequences," he said. Ethan met his gaze evenly. "There are already consequences," he replied. Lily's hands rested quietly on the table, but her fingers tightened just slightly, the only sign of the emotion she had kept contained all day. She looked at Ethan now, not as Noah Reed, not as a stranger trying to understand the system, but as someone who had stepped directly into it and chosen not to look away. Something unspoken passed between them, something that did not need words. The manager stood abruptly, the chair scraping lightly against the floor. "This is not how leadership works," he said, his voice sharper now, less controlled. "You cannot walk in and dismantle processes you barely understand." Ethan did not move. "I understand enough," he said. "I understand that people who told the truth were removed instead of being heard. I understand that data was changed to hide that truth. And I understand that you expected no one to question it." He paused for just a fraction of a second, then added, "That was your mistake." The room felt smaller now, tighter, as if the walls themselves were closing in around the reality that could no longer be avoided. The supervisor looked down at the table, then back up, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. "What are you going to do?" he asked. Ethan did not hesitate. "I am going to fix it," he said. And for the first time since the conversation began, there was no uncertainty in the room about what that meant. Because this was no longer a hidden system. It was exposed. And once something like that was brought into the light, it could not go back to the way it was. Ethan picked up the badge from the table, turning it once in his hand before setting it aside again, not as something he needed anymore, but as something he had outgrown. Noah Reed had been a role, a tool, a way in. But Ethan Cole was the one who would finish this. And outside the glass walls, the silence was no longer passive. It was waiting. The silence outside the glass walls did not break when Ethan opened the door. It deepened, spreading across the floor in a way that felt almost electric, because people knew something had shifted, even if they did not yet understand what. And as he stepped out into the open space, every movement seemed to slow just enough for eyes to follow him, for whispers to hover without forming into words. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. But everything about his presence had changed, no longer blending in, no longer temporary, no longer invisible. Behind him, the two managers remained inside the room, not following, not stopping him, because they understood now that control had slipped beyond that space. Ethan walked straight toward the center of the floor, where the open area connected multiple departments, a place designed for collaboration, but now filled with tension that no one could hide. He stopped there, turning slowly, his gaze moving across the employees who had spent months, maybe years, learning to stay quiet, learning to survive within rules they had never agreed to but had no power to change. And for a brief moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone again, the same device that had revealed the hidden system, the same tool that now held everything together. He tapped once, connecting to the building's internal display network, a system meant for presentations, for announcements, for controlled communication. Within seconds, the large screens mounted across the floor flickered, then shifted. Numbers disappeared. Dashboards faded. And in their place, a simple interface appeared, clean, undeniable. The operational log. The entries. The pattern. A quiet ripple moved through the room, heads turning, people standing, others stepping closer, drawn in by something they could not ignore anymore. Ethan did not need to raise his voice. The room was already listening. "For a long time," he said, his tone steady, carrying naturally through the silence. "This company has told you that performance is everything." A few people exchanged glances. Others looked at the screens again, reading, processing. "That accuracy matters," he continued. "That integrity is part of our values." He paused, just long enough for the words to settle, then added, "But that is not what has been happening." The tension shifted again, no longer just quiet, but alive, uncertain, waiting. Ethan gestured slightly toward the screens. "This is what has been happening," he said. Reports changed to match expectations. Concerns dismissed instead of addressed. And people removed when they refused to stay silent. The words did not need emphasis. The evidence spoke for itself. A voice from the back spoke up, hesitant but clear. "Is this real?" someone asked. Ethan met the direction of the voice, nodding once. "Yes," he said simply. No hesitation. No explanation needed beyond that. Another voice, closer this time. "Then why did no one say anything?" a woman asked. Ethan's gaze softened just slightly, not in weakness, but in understanding. "Some people did," he replied. "They just were not heard." His eyes shifted briefly, finding Lily, who now stood near the edge of the crowd, no longer hidden behind her desk, no longer just part of the system. For the first time, she was visible in a different way, not as someone overlooked, but as someone who had tried to stand against it. Ethan looked back at the room. "That changes today," he said. Behind him, the glass office door opened, the manager stepping out, his composure strained, his authority slipping under the weight of what was now public. "This is inappropriate," he said sharply. "You cannot present internal data without proper review." Ethan did not turn immediately. When he did, it was slow, deliberate. "It has already been reviewed," he said. "That is the problem." A few quiet murmurs spread through the crowd now, no longer fully suppressed, no longer completely controlled. The supervisor followed behind the manager, his voice lower, more cautious. "We can resolve this internally," he said. "There is no need to escalate." Ethan held his gaze. "It has already been escalated," he replied. The moment the truth was hidden, instead of addressed. He turned back to the employees, not as a figure above them, but as someone standing among them, even if the difference in power was now undeniable. "Effective immediately," he said, his voice steady. "All performance reviews scheduled for this week are suspended." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. "All flagged employee records are being reopened," he continued. "Every complaint will be reviewed again, transparently, with full accountability." He paused, letting the weight of that settle, then added, "And the system that allowed this to happen is being shut down." This time, the silence broke, not into chaos, not into noise, but into something quieter, something stronger. Relief, uncertainty, hope, emotions that had been buried under routine and fear, now rising slowly to the surface. Ethan's gaze found Lily again, just for a second, and in that moment, the smallest detail returned to him, something simple, something easily overlooked. The lunch she had given him earlier. A small act, unnoticed by everyone else, but not by him. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the folded napkin she had used to wrap it, still there, still intact. He held it for a second, then walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. The room remained quiet, watching, waiting, but this moment was smaller, more personal, even in the middle of everything. "You said people stopped asking questions," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. Lily met his gaze, her expression steady but no longer guarded in the same way. "Most of them did," she replied. Ethan nodded slightly. "You did not," he said. It was not a question. Lily did not respond right away, but her silence said enough. Ethan placed the folded napkin in her hand, a simple gesture, a quiet return. "That mattered," he said. And for the first time since this began, the system was no longer defining the moment. The people inside it were. The room did not return to what it had been, because something fundamental had shifted, something that could not be undone or quietly rewritten. And as the screens continued to display the truth that had once been hidden, people no longer looked away. They leaned in, they read, they connected the details to their own experiences, to the moments they had been told to stay quiet, to the times they had questioned something and then convinced themselves it was safer not to ask again. Ethan stood at the center of it all, not elevated above them, but grounded in the same space, the same reality, because that was the only way this could hold, not as an announcement, but as a change that people could feel and trust. The two managers remained near the glass corridor, no longer stepping forward, no longer attempting to control the narrative, because there was no narrative left to control, only facts that had already been seen and understood. A few employees began speaking quietly among themselves, not whispers this time, but real conversations, tentative at first, then steadier, as if a weight had been lifted that none of them had realized they were carrying until it was gone. Ethan let that moment breathe, because this part mattered just as much as anything he had said, the space for people to process, to reclaim their voices in a place where those voices had been systematically reduced. After a few seconds, he stepped forward again, his presence drawing attention without force. "There is one more thing," he said, his tone calm but clear. The room settled again, not into silence this time, but into focus. "Accountability does not end with exposure," he continued. "It begins there." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the glass offices where the managers stood, their authority now reduced to something uncertain, something that no longer held the same weight it had just an hour ago. "Effective immediately," he said, "all individuals involved in the implementation and execution of this system are being placed under formal investigation." There was no dramatic reaction, no raised voices, just a quiet understanding of what that meant, and that was enough. "This process will be transparent," Ethan added. "Every decision will be documented. Every outcome will be shared." He paused, letting that settle, then shifted his gaze back to the employees. "And moving forward, this company will operate on something very simple," he said. "Truth will not be filtered." The words were not loud, but they carried further than anything else he had said that day. Lily stood a few feet away, the folded napkin still in her hand, her fingers lightly holding onto it, as if it represented more than just a small gesture returned. She watched him now with a different kind of focus, not cautious, not guarded, but steady, like she was seeing something she had almost stopped believing in. Ethan met her gaze for a brief moment, then stepped closer, not as a CEO addressing an employee, but as one person acknowledging another. "You asked the questions no one else would," he said quietly, just enough for her to hear. Lily shook her head slightly, a faint, almost incredulous smile forming. "I just did my job," she replied. Ethan nodded once. "Exactly," he said. There was a subtle pause between them, not uncomfortable, but real, something unspoken forming in the space where pressure and pretense had once existed. "I want you in the review process," he continued, his voice still low but certain. "Not as a subject, as part of the team that rebuilds this." Lily's expression shifted, surprise first, then hesitation, not from doubt in him, but from the weight of what he was offering. "That is not a small role," she said. Ethan's answer came without delay. "It is not supposed to be," he replied. She looked down at the napkin for a second, then back up at him, her decision forming in that quiet moment. "Then I will do it," she said. There was no hesitation in her voice now, no guarded distance, just clarity. Ethan allowed himself a small, genuine smile, the first one that did not feel measured or controlled. "Good," he said. Around them, the atmosphere continued to shift, not back to normal, but forward into something new, something uncertain but real, built not on silence, but on the absence of it. Employees began returning to their desks, not out of obligation, but with a different energy, a different awareness of what their work meant and what it no longer had to be. The screens still displayed the truth, but now they felt less like exposure and more like a foundation, something that could not be ignored again. Ethan stepped back slightly, taking in the room, the people, the change already beginning to take shape. Just hours ago, he had walked into this building as someone no one noticed, carrying a question he was not sure he would be able to answer. Now he stood in the middle of that answer, not as a figure above the system, but as someone responsible for what came next. He glanced once more at Lily, who had already turned slightly, speaking with another employee, her voice steady, her presence no longer confined to the edges of the room. And in that moment, the pattern that had defined the day completed itself, not with a dramatic ending, but with something quieter and more lasting. A system built on silence had been broken by a single choice to speak and a single choice to listen. And that was where everything changed.